Hi everybody, and welcome to a super exciting update to the procedural city generation. I was honestly blown away by the reaction that I got. Everybody that I saw the video and some of the later pictures seemed really interested in the project. And I myself, honestly, after doing that initial video, beginning of the week, got really excited and decided, you know what, maybe I can, play around with the idea a little bit more and just kind of work on it. And that turned into basically working on it all of this week. So I've been working really hard, adding new features. I had an original idea, like I said before, but I never had a chance to kind of sit down and work on it. So there's been a huge amount of changes and updates. What I have now, just literally, a week later, can't really even be compared to what I showed you guys. So this is really, really exciting. There's a lot of things that I want to get through. I want to give you an idea of kind of what I have. And right now, there are so many ideas that I have of so many different things and so many directions that I can take this that I really want to hear what you have to say. It's really important because I can take this in many different directions. But let me just kind of give you, before I even go into details, let me just give you a quick tour of what I have so far. And this is kind of the city that you're seeing here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play and maximize. And you can see here that the first thing is the frame rate, right? The original city that you guys saw was obviously completely unoptimized and it was running something like 30 frames per second. This city is in similar size. The map is the same size and you can see it's firmly stuck at 120. And I'm pretty sure you have an idea why. We're using instant static meshes whenever we can. But first thing you'll notice is that the city has different types of buildings, right? It looks like I'm gonna start walking here. The first area in the outskirts of the city is more residential. So I created really quick models for houses. And you can see that these houses, they may not look it, but they are randomized. There's about 6 or 7 different models, and whether it's a change in material or model for the first floor, some houses have, as you can see, 2 windows, some have 4 windows, some have a ceiling that is front facing, some is side facing, right? So there's some randomization here. You also notice that the buildings have now interiors. These buildings, all of the buildings in the city have random interiors that you can now define on a per building basis. So this specific house right now has 2 possible interiors that it can spawn. Interiors are fully customizable. Um, and you can see that I'm interacting here with the physics enabled furniture from Epic's content pack. You can see that if I go away, I come back, this has a different set of furniture. Notice that this has the little table here versus this one, well, actually, this had the table as well. We're going to see another one soon. Again, this is random. There you go. This is the other layout. As you can see, it doesn't have the table here, and it has the couch here on this side. Um, so full size city, every building has interiors. The algorithm to spawn the buildings has been dramatically improved, though as you can see, I'm going to start walking here. I'm pretty sure you'll see some glitches. So obviously there's still some work to be done. Actually, right here, you can see the algorithm spawned these 2 buildings in a corner, and they're kind of messed up. So that's one of the things that I still need to work on. The corner detection, when you get into a crossroads, you need to make sure that there's a buffer between the buildings. So that's obviously a work in progress. But now we go from a residential area to a more industrial area here. As you can see, this or my attempt in Blender is to be more like a industrial type buildings here. So if you go inside again, the interior is different for this type of building. We got some mock boxes here, right? You can drag around, and again, Epic's props are a lifesaver here. In this case, I think I only have that one interior just because of I ran out of time. So this is a slightly different version of that building. Same exact interior. Again, you can make as many random interiors as possible. It's literally an array. You can have 20 different possible interiors. Uh, you notice that there's a different type of building here. This looks more like a hangar here, so a little bit longer. This guy's gonna have a different interior. I'm gonna try to knock these boxes out. Why not? There you go. These interiors are actually spawning on proximity, right? So every building has a blueprint with an overlap trigger, and when the player gets close, the interior is actually spawned on the fly. If I leave and go far enough, the interior will stop being rendered to save on resources. Let me see if I can see it from here. So you can see in the background, as you can see there in the background, it kind of went away. However, when you get close, it comes back, and notice that the positions are still the same. So in your city, you can go and wreak havoc on a building, leave, do whatever you want. You can come back, and the interior will be exactly as you left it, right? And then let's take a quick right turn here, and let's go to the commercial district, right? So we have outskirts, we have residential, then we have industrial, and now we have the commercial, which is kind of the same thing that you guys saw last time. Same deal. Every single building has interiors. In this case, for the commercial, I think I made 3 possible variants, and I only did it for the first floor. So if you go to the second floor, it's kind of empty. But again, there is no limit, right? It's just a matter of taking the time to set it up. So for today, I just wanted to show you the possibilities here. So this is a building lobby, and notice that this is one case where there's no tables here, only 2 benches here, and a table with a chair. And these are again randomly spawned. So this one has the 2 chairs here, but no chair here, and then it has an extra bench here. So again, just very slight variations, but it's just to drive the point across that the buildings in this city have interiors, and you can customize random interiors. This is messed up here, and do pretty much whatever you want. So let me just eject here, and as you can see, the buildings per district seem to be random, right? So the skyscrapers have different heights, and as you can see, if I just go into any of these skyscrapers or even any of this, you'll notice that all of the building interiors are gone, right? As I was saying, they will only spawn when you're close. And again, this is to optimize on memory. You know, if you have a city that is massive, you want to have the least amount of objects spawned in the world. So, yeah, so let's go ahead and eject and take a quick look at how I achieved this. So the first thing I want to share is my idea of the workflow. And this is really important because this is basically what's driving all of the features that I'm putting in, right? So there are many different solutions out there, and I watched a ton of videos of procedural city generation. Even Unity has a few really interesting projects, and everybody has a slightly different approach, right? Some projects generate the city on a strict grid, and you have to specify the city blocks, right? Almost like a X and Y coordinates. Every block is this size, and then it generates the city by blocks, right? It's very strict. Some take real world data, like OSM data. Some use heat maps. So there's all kinds of different things, right? So here's my idea of what I think would provide the most amount of flexibility, because at the end of the day, I think procedural generation should be the first step. You should always have the option to tweak and modify it to suit your needs, right? So number one would be to create your road network. And you can do that either manually, how I did it here with my modular road tool. These are road segments. I literally just lay down the city streets. Or eventually what I want to do is include some kind of procedural road network generation. Now that's on my to-do list. That's probably the hardest thing on my to-do list because I still not sure exactly how to do it, especially in Blueprint because it's slow. But number one, create your city streets, right? Create the entire layout for your city, for streets. The next thing would be to define different zones. And I'm gonna go into out of game mode here, and you can see how the city actually looks like. So you'll notice that we have this different colored cubes, right? Rectangles. Each one of these is an actor, is a zone, right? So this is one of the main design choices that I made, right? So the spawner, the procedural city generator, will look at specific zones, and the zone itself will have how many buildings, what is the pool of random buildings that it can spawn, and a bunch of other things. So if you can see here, for example, I have the commercial zone, which is in the middle here, and you can see some of the properties. So I have 6 potential building types. These are structs. So I can add as many variations of buildings as I want. And each one will have a specific actor reference, the bounds, right? So what's the buffer that you want per building? Then you're going to have the building buffer, the space between buildings, and the street buffer, the space between the street and the building, right? Some buildings you may want closer to the street, some buildings you may want farther. You can see, we're going to see this later, you have the option of flattening the landscape. I added this 2 days ago, so you don't have to use a static mesh. You can do a landscape and flatten it to fit the building. You obviously have the options of spawning interiors. In this case, obviously the default is yes. And what is the building interior class? I'll show you that in a second. And you have this list, right? And the spawner goes from street to street, and based on the zone, it'll spawn the specific buildings, right? So one street, the same street, can have more than one zone. As you can see, this street goes and has a residential and a industrial zone. So again, to mimic what a real city has, right? One street could be like Main Street. You can start in the center of town. It can be like a really big street with commercial buildings, and if you keep going and going and going, eventually the same street can convert into a more residential street, a one-lane street, etc. Right? So the zones are kind of what's keeping everything together. You define the zones. You can create as many zones as you want. You just create a child from the master blueprint, and every single zone you can have specific buildings. So you don't have to have commercial, right? This is just my default. You can have 5 versions of commercial, right? Commercial high skyscrapers, commercial low skyscrapers, whatever, right? And you can just lay down your zones on the map. The third thing would be to actually spawn the buildings, and that's when the spawner comes in. And the spawner would, again, go through every single street, get the information from the zone, and decide what building to spawn, including, and that's going to be a random building with a random interior based on your specs. Then after that's done, we are going to convert all of the buildings into instant static meshes. As you can see here, for example, I just selected one building here, and you can see that this is actually an instant static mesh actor. If I select this one here, you can see that these guys are being selected. Let me go out of game mode so you can see. So that's another optimization. For example, all of these houses that I have selected are just one actor, right? That's a massive optimization. And after you do that, this is kind of where I am now. The next step would be to spawn foliage, which I don't have yet, and to spawn city props, right? So city props are a little more tricky because I'm not sure how I'm going to do it yet. But props would be stop signs, benches, fire hydrants. Basically, I want you to be able to define your list of props in an array, define some parameters for the props, maybe like probability of spawning or location, something. I have to figure out how to do that. And then the spawner would go and literally populate your city with all of these props. So if you want to have stop signs on every intersection, you can do that. If you want to have street lights, if you want to have benches, whatever you want to do, I want this to automatically spawn it for you. And I noticed that every single step, you can modify your city, right? So as soon as the buildings are spawned, you can change the building location, you can modify it, and once you're happy with your buildings, then you can convert them into static meshes. Same thing is going to be the idea for foliage. I want to spawn foliage as regular actors, and then once you modify the actors, change the location, transform, whatever, then you will convert them into actual foliage type, which is super efficient. And the same thing for the props. So let's see what else I want to show, because there's a lot here, but I showed you the I showed you the zones. So every zone, like you say here, industrial. Again, you have five different buildings. And residential, I have one more that I haven't shown you guys. Actually, let me just open the map. Street. I want to save here, and I have a rural zone. And you can see here in this map, as soon as it decides to open, and it's the green here, and the rural area has like this ranch type houses. You can see they're one-story houses, and they're more separated. So this is another map that I use for testing. So you can see again, same idea: commercial, industrial, residential, and rural countryside. Same idea, and you can see here that you can have curves, by the way, and the houses will go around the curves, right? So I didn't want to force a grid system, right? If you just want to create a grid, that's fairly simple. The trick becomes, how do you spawn the houses and the buildings that are going to not collide with each other and actually follow the road, right? I want you to be able to create any layout you want on for your city from the streets, and have the spawner actually spawn them in the right place. Okay, so the next thing would be the interiors, right? So let's see if I can select one of these guys here. So the interiors are their own blueprint, and this is a blueprint that is spawned inside each individual building, and it has a trigger. And you can see that there's a trigger multiplier. It uses the parent's building's bounds, and you can then use a multiplier from that bounds. And you can see here that you have an actor list. These are the potential interior blueprints that you can spawn, and in this case I have two: rural interior 1 and 4. And you can select whether you want them to spawn randomly or not. If you take this out, then it'll spawn all of the blueprints, right? So you may want to have several actors. Maybe one is just the static objects, maybe another one is a physics object, or maybe there's, for specific houses, you want like a hero actor. And by the way, you can do it after a spawn. You can come to this individual one, right, and change the array, right? So let's say in your game, this specific house is going to have a spawn or a treasure. You can come in here and say, no, for this specific one, I want the interior to spawn another class, and that class will contain whatever you want, right? So if you don't have random, it'll spawn everything on this list. If you have random, it'll pick one from that list, and you can see the explanation there. And that's the default behavior, right? So the idea would be you would create several different possible interiors per building type. The spawner will then choose one random interior, and that random interior will stay, right? So that random interior is only selected once. You can also choose a despawn method. Right now you can hide the objects or destroy the objects, right? So that's another thing, something to think about. So let's just choose this house here, and I'm going to do destroy objects. If I click play here, it'll choose a random interior. Whoops. Outside, and this is the random interior that it chose. It's just this table here, and if I kind of move it around just to show you, and I leave, it's gonna despawn when I'm far enough, and then when I come back in, it's going to spawn it again. So if your interior is static, then this is the better option, because when you destroy the object, you get it out of memory. The default is hiding the objects. Whoops. Like in this case, this is hiding, and all it will do is just literally hide the object. It will still be in memory, though it will not be rendered, right? So in this case, I made a mess in this house. I come back to this house, everything spawned the same, but when I come to this house, the mess is still there, right? So you have to decide again based on your game. Do you want the interiors to be destroyed? That's the most efficient way. Or do you want them to stay the same? And again, you have the option on a per building basis. So in your massive city, maybe every building has a random interior, and those will be destroyed when the player leaves, freeing your memory. But if you have a hero asset or a specific building for a mission, then that specific building can have the hiding objects method, which means that if the player goes and makes a mess, then the game will keep the mess for the player, right? Player can go anywhere, and as long as you're still in play, those elements are in memory and they're just hiding, right? So two different spawns. Right now, and this warning is because I spawned inside a trigger and it didn't trigger it properly. So obviously, in a real game, you would start the player somewhere else, right? So how would you create the interiors? The interiors are just specific blueprints. So if you see here in buildings, interiors, I have a master class, and this is the class that is actually spawned. And this has the trigger multiplier, the list of actors, in this case 3. So you're going to pick a random out of these 3 actors. And inside you can have an actual relative transform. Right now they're at the origin, but you can actually change this. And then here's what one of those interiors looks like. It's just a collection, and this is for commercial, by the way. And this is just a collection of static meshes. And these guys have simulate physics. Sorry about that. And you can see that a lot of these guys have simulate physics. Some don't, like this lamp, for example. Doesn't make sense, otherwise it would fall. So you would create your own blueprint with as many actors as you want, and this would be spawned. Now, if you have something like Nate's prefab tool, this would be super easy to do. Actually, I have it, and I haven't played around too much with it, but somebody mentioned it on the comments. So this just spawns an actor class. You just specify a class, right? So you can make as many different classes as you want, and it'll be automatically spawned. The other thing I wanted to show is the landscape. And this was, again, the reason I've been able to do so much is because a lot of this stuff was already figured out. The code was kind of there already from MRT. So if I take a quick look at what I have here, I have a road. And as you can see, the road itself modified the landscape and elevated it. And the road is just kind of following this little turn. And then I have a rural zone, so you can see here, that spawned buildings all around the road. And because the option of modifying the landscape is there by default, the houses would automatically increase and make their own landscape. And you can see that we have a spline here. This is a spline that would determine the length and the width. You can specify per building. So then you can create, maybe some houses have like a bigger backyard, or some houses may not have a backyard. It's up to you to decide. And you can see, again, every house has a trigger here. So if I just press play, then the houses will have their interiors. And again, like I mentioned, by default, just because I like playing with physics objects, they are just being hidden. There you go. And you can see that in this case, because the multiplier is so low, you can actually see the pop-in. So again, based on your game, you can specify the size of the trigger. Same thing here. It's just a curved road, and you have some industrial buildings. Another cool thing I did is you can see here that this entire area is flat. So I created a class, and I called it BP Align Landscape, and all this thing does is flatten the landscape based on this. So sometimes if you have a landscape, you might want to have your city in like a little valley, for example. So instead of having every single building have to flatten the terrain, if you wanted to have like a little clearing, you use this class. Let me just show you real quick. And you just kind of put it wherever you want. You can change the box scale, right? And you can change the width, start width and end width, and whether you want to raise or lower the terrain. And all you have to do is click Align Terrain, and there you go. You have this little clearing here, as you can see. So I am trying to think for as many different use cases as possible. If you're building your city, I think most people would probably want to use a terrain. So having a nice way of clearing an area for your buildings to be there is really nice. Another cool use case here is curves. So you can see that I had a curved road go all around, and in the middle there's mountains here. And remember, the spawner has an option to only spawn in one side of the road. So in this case, I selected this road and I said, I only want you to spawn on the left side of the road. And this is why the streets here only have houses on the left, right? So the orientation would be this way. And again, in these houses, they don't have interiors. I forgot to put them in, but you get the point. So you can have like a really fancy road. In this case, you can see the stepping effect, and that's because they have different heights. And you actually do see this a lot here in the US, where they'll just build a plot for a specific house. And this was all done automatically. And again, once it's auto-generated, you can come in here and you can change it to whatever you want, right? So you can always feel free to change it, right? So if you wanted to get this house and lower it a little bit more, then you can come in here and click Align Terrain, and it will automatically align the terrain, as you can see there. Or you can just put it a little higher, say, nah, I want it higher, and you can make it higher there. There you go. All right, so that's pretty much where I am. The video is already kind of long. Obviously, I wanted to show you how to prepare the assets, but really there's really nothing to it. The difference here is that every asset is now a static mesh. So because they're static meshes individually, you have to have a predeterministic number of assets, right? So remember, the more variety you have, the less efficient it becomes, because then you have to have more instant static mesh actors, right? If you have a city with literally just one type of building, which kind of obviously would be really boring, you could make a massive city, because then all of that would be into just one actor, right? So in that case, I can, it wouldn't be as, as nice, but it'll be efficient. So you have to think about what is the purpose and what's your design. How big do you want your city to be? Let's go back to the city test here. What's next? I've basically spent this entire week working on this. Obviously, the spawning algorithm still needs some work. There's some collision here. So that obviously needs to work. I need to implement foliage. I know that's obviously kind of a given for a city. I want to implement the props. And I would love to come up with a way of creating a random road network. Now the question is that something that you guys think is a must? Is that something that is a nice to have but not really necessary? How important is it for you guys to have a random city layout be done by the blueprint? Or would you much rather, just lay down your own roads? And also, how important is it for you to spawn the foliage and spawn the props? And what logic, if you have any ideas of what logic to use for the spawners, please do let me know. For foliage, I think it's a little easier, but when it comes to props, it could get really complicated really quickly, right? How do I populate a city with props? I really do welcome any ideas. Right now, again, haven't even thought about how to do it, but this is something that I have to kind of figure out, and I want to keep it as flexible as possible. So if this is something that you're interested in, please do leave a comment in the section below, or if you're watching this from one of the forum threads, please let me know your feedback. And for the new features, what do you think? How would you like me to spawn props? How would you like me to spawn foliage? Do you like my system for interiors? Is there anything else that you would like me to add? I know somebody asked me to have a blueprint that would spawn buildings in a specific area without depending on streets. And I can do that. That's fairly simple, right? So maybe in a futuristic game, or maybe in the real countryside, there are no roads, but you still want buildings spawned in a random area. So that's another thing that I have in mind that's fairly simple to do, right? So anything else that you guys can think of, I really do welcome your comments. So yeah, that's it. I'm sorry for the long video, but there's a lot to show. So let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you in the next video.